It's a great honor and privilege to introduce our first guest speaker. It will be Jaco Oosthuizen, well-known CEO of the RSA Group in South Africa, and he will touch on the supply chain challenges, the effects of closure on the hospitality industry, the importance of the informal sector's buying power, and much more than that. A hearty welcome to you, Jaco.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know so much about famous, but thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about who the RSA Group is and to give a bit of insight in terms of how we experience these unprecedented times. The RSA Group is fortunate to represent producers in all three major marketing channels, in exports, in the retail, informal retail, and on the markets across South Africa. And we were also fortunate to be part of essential services and experienced this process of lockdown firsthand. What gave us some insight was being in the export market and what happened potentially and what could happen to us, what happened in the overseas markets where access to countries was severely limited, where markets was closed. And that sort of prepared us for what to expect. And we could make 2 weeks before we started to make arrangements in terms of social distancing, in terms of sending staff home that could work from home, and then tackle the challenge of potentially how we're going to handle markets and social distancing issues and markets. And some of the issues that you've mentioned was not foreseen. There's no manual that were written for COVID-19 and lockdown. And I do think where we are today, we are also struggling with how do we get ourselves effectively out of a lockdown situation in terms of the stages that we're in. And we did see the increases in pricing. We also saw decreases in pricing, and we also experienced the beautiful robustness of our markets and the ability to get fresh produce to people at fair market prices. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thanks, Peter.
One of the most important statistics of the performance in growth, the decline on prices of top 20 products and lines. You've done some studies and research on the last 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, Peter, we did, and it was interesting to see which lines were the ones that sort of performed best in terms of commodities or market lines, and I wouldn't have guessed that the ginger would end up on top. But in terms of what it can be put to good use, we were very happy for the ginger producers in terms of where prices and volumes are going in terms of the commodity. But the interesting sight or the interesting process for us was that there are substantial growth on markets for all products. And the barriers to entry to markets are relatively low, and that is all good signs for budding producers and settled commercial producers. And the markets learned us a few lessons in terms of the past 3 months with lockdown, in the sense that it was very quick to move with where demand was shifting to on commodity lines. We had the impact of the closure of the hospitality trade quite quickly, and it had an impact on certain products, and that information moved quickly through the market, and yet the market developed the ability to move that stock that didn't move initially. And it also rewarded the producers in terms of where product was in high demand. But obviously that was all in balance with supply and demand forces that we saw changing as well on markets, and producers had to adjust, and supply lines had to be adjusted to be able to keep the market stocked. And also you saw the effect on retail, and I think the producers and their support staff and their workers did a phenomenal job in keeping these markets stocked in terms of product.
Jaco, you touched on it, but is there? Could you elaborate more on the comparison that we had, from since May 2019 up to now for the year period?
Yeah, I can, Peter. And when we look at most of the markets, and if we compare May 2020 to May 2019, on most of the markets, we see a decrease in most of the major sort of commodities on the markets. And I think an economic reality is that there is a tightness in spending power. So we did not see, yes, we saw price increases that came with less product on markets, but I do think it was suppressed in terms of the availability of spending power. And I do think that's going to be an interesting topic to cover going forward, that how is spending power going to recover in difficult times like this, including where a big portion of the demand is not trading at full capacity, and that's the hospitality trade. I think that got certainly offset by people eating more at home, cooking more, and there was that increased demand for basic products in terms of cooking at home and looking for value. And that's exactly what the markets provided to buyers and their consumers.
Thank you, Jaco, for that. Dr. Johnny, would you like to add on?
Yes, Peter. I think, as Jaco mentioned, I think purchase power and the shift in consumer behavior will be a major role player in the markets, in market price changes, of course. We look into, of course, the markets, the fresh produce markets in South Africa is, of course, driven by supply and demand. I think it's, I want to commend the RSA Group, especially for what role they are playing in making sure supply and demand is the major factor that is determining prices at the moment. And within, as Jaco also mentioned, in these uncertain times, it was crucial that supply and demand play the major factor, or the most important role in determining these prices. That led to not only the consumer but also the producer to be able to continue to trade in these uncertain times.
I think this is one for you, Jaco. What are some of the largest issues in the supply chain domestically experienced?
Thanks, Peter. I think if we look at how quickly producers had to compartmentalize their farms in terms of being able to if you could put it that, to make sure that there's no infections at farm level, there was an impact in terms of logistics. But I think the biggest impact that we've experienced was the initial lockdown of the informal trade and the spaza shops that could not get to market in that first week, and organized agriculture had to work closely with government to be able to get that turned around, because it is, like Johnny mentioned, quite a large demand sector within our markets, and they've developed the ability to be very efficient, get to markets and get product to people. So that was for us one of the largest impacts in terms of the supply chain. And then obviously the hospitality trade that was non-existent in the first 5-6 weeks of lockdown. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for that one, Jaco. I think we're going to move to our next poll, and it looks like the most popular one at this stage is changes in the consumer demand. Sorry for you, Jaco, but it's you again.
What we experienced in terms of the changing consumer trends, I think we all experienced. We were in lockdown and people cooked at home. So less convenience food and a bigger demand for basic fresh produce foodstuffs. And what that brought together was that the initial, if you could term that, panic buying we saw in terms of even fresh continued for quite some time in retail, and they experienced very good trading periods. But I think some of the trends that is going to remain with us for quite some time is that people rediscover the health benefits of fresh produce and home cooking and the ability of the independent retail and retail to be able to supply that demand. And then the processing of or the cut vegetables and prepared vegetables, I think, took a knock because people went back to basics. How long that's going to be with us is going to be interesting. But certainly, from our perspective, we think that people have rediscovered the value of fresh produce. And what we did see was in terms of our regional markets, where it's in the far outlying provinces in terms of Nketsi, Polokwane, Nelspruit, and the new market in Vaal, that those markets were discovered, and we see not to go with the trend, but we saw exponential growth on those markets in terms of sales and volume, and the ability, in other words, to get product to people. That was for us an eye-opener.
Jaco, I'm going to ask you in a nutshell, and it's a very interesting question on changes in the consumer demand. The buying behavior of consumers changed now forever, and during the lockdown time, more consumers moved to online buying. Do you think that will be the trend in future?
Peter, yeah, I do think there's been an increase, and the latest sort of information that we've received from some of the retailers is that previously some of the retailers did not concentrate on online fresh selling because there was the and we always believe that fresh produce needs to be tactile, you need to be involved with the product, but they confirmed that they certainly saw an increase they opened up fresh produce online, and they saw an increase, and later on during lockdown, that did not taper down. So it does seem to me that it's here to stay, and it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to influence the change in demand structures. And I do believe we will find that, you'll have the Uber type supply structures coming into play, where in the past people would have gone to their local, now they don't want to go to the local, and they order and the Uber picks up for them. It's very interesting how that's going to influence certainly the demand structures going forward.
Thank you for that, Jaco, and I think we can move over to another poll, and well, the most popular at this stage is the fresh produce market expectations. Very interesting, and you've done a lot of research on that, Johnny. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, thanks, Peter. Fresh produce market expectations, I think Jaco and his team will also have a good know-how of where these markets are headed. I think looking into longer term trends, we can see that supply usually plays a crucial role, and supply is determined by environmental factors, of course. Specifically, when you look like a more perishable product such as tomatoes, supply plays a crucial role, and that is dependent on the weather conditions, whether it's frost or very hot, and we have seen that prices react very quickly in terms of that market. Looking into other products such as potatoes and so forth, onions, I think we can see over the longer term, if we compare monthly trends, we can see that it's usually supply-driven markets. Very interesting when looking into specific weeks, and I think within specific days as well, we can see that demand starts to play a more crucial role, of course, when people are getting paid, and basically the purchase power of your consumers out there. And that's why we at AMT, of course, try to phone the market agents and to get the feeling of the market as well, and to see what is happening on the ground. And the market agents from the RSA Group is really helpful in terms of that. So we can determine those trends. I want to link to Jaco as well, and with garlic, for instance, I know he mentioned ginger, but garlic prices soared as well through this lockdown, and we have seen it can be due to demand. I think it's considered as a healthy product, but we have also seen that volumes decrease significantly. So it'll always be different factors that needs to be taken into account, but taking these factors into account, you must be able to make educated guesses. If you start planning, if you're a producer out there, you need to see what is the rhythm of the market, basically. And I think you can't have a one size fit all. Every different commodity on the market, and going deeper into that, I think different qualities, different sizes, for instance, let's take potatoes, will have a different rhythm. So it is essential to talk to your market agent regularly and to get the feel of that market, which is crucial in your ultimate profitability going forward. Thanks, Peter.
Jaco, I think you can make name for yourself now. Just say, tell us a bit more. Do you agree with what Johnny said, even also on the supply-driven markets?
Yeah, Peter, I think Johnny sketched the picture, but I think if we expect or assume that we will keep on to a lot of the new buyers that have entered our markets, I think people have rediscovered markets. There's a lot of new buyers on our markets, and we have expanded the offering in terms of those regional markets in the country. So if I take that into account, and I hope, Henning, we're right that winter is on its way, and it looking like there's a few cold fronts on the way, it could influence potentially some of the supply structures and take the edge off. And I do believe that markets will react, and I think we will see positive pricing for producers in the next few months on markets. And there has been some indication of that, but overall I'm not negative in terms of markets. I see positive results and positive pricing coming out of this. Obviously it's balanced by the demand side and the availability of cash. The interesting part is we did immediately see an impact when liquor stores opened in terms of the availability of free cash suddenly to be spent on basic foodstuffs. But that's natural, but it is heightened in times like this when you need to stock up and suddenly there's this outflow of money that normally would have been spent somewhere else. That's what we're going to experience going forward. But overall, I'm positive about how markets will react going forward.
But Jaco, just a quick question, a very interesting question that came in. With the increased demand of fresh produce in South Africa, has there been any specific or unexpected changes in imports and exports of fresh produce?
Peter, not really. We South Africa is in a very lucky position that we're self-sufficient 12 months of the year. And the only time there's really counter-seasonal export opportunities is in winter, where we would be seeing grapes being imported from I think the first country that we start with is Egypt, and then it moves into Europe, into Spain, and then in the stone fruit season there would be some stone fruit. So I don't really see any opportunity really for importing of product. And if you look at the exchange rate, it doesn't make sense, when we have local production to import product. You might find that from an export perspective, there could be price points locally that could take some of the export volumes to be sold locally. But that could happen. But I think from a local supply perspective, I don't see the need for any imports of product at this point in time.
Jaco, and it's still back to you. Another question, is there traditionally a negative correlation between economic growth and demand on fresh produce markets?
Fresh produce markets are we're normally behind the curve. When it's tough going, fresh produce seems to be doing well because it's sort of the ultimate basic. But you can't escape the macroeconomic conditions. You can't escape those economic signals. But when we are at times like this, fresh produce tend to perform well at all levels in terms of difficult times. So we are a little bit counter-cyclical, if I could put it to you that way.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Jaco. I think just to conclude, and I'm going to run through our panel, just a last wrap-up and a question, given these developments over the last 3 months and also during the lockdown, is it all bad news going forward? Can we take any positives out of this?
From a technological perspective, the industry has been kicked forward 5 years. We certainly have to start to implement a wider range of technological solutions, specifically when it comes to selling. And I think that virtuality is going to play a bigger role sooner. I also see a little bit of a fault line that crept in, where facilities that are managed by local councils that are not up to standard. I believe the private sector is going to take the opportunity and provide new points of distribution and new markets, because that's just an inevitable scenario. And right across where you're sitting from, you can see it in terms of the new farm market, and where from a vereniging market perspective, there was just no care and attention to the facility. So for me, those are the positives that we're taking out of it going forward, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you, gents. Just a reminder that the content of today's conference and webinar will be available on various social media platforms. Certainly most important, you'll be able to find it on the NWU YouTube channel. So thank you very much to our speakers, our NWU experts. It's Dr. Johnny van der Merwe and also Dr. David Spies. And then Jaco Oosthuizen, CEO of the RSA Group of South Africa, and Henning Ellis, the Managing Director of AgriServe. Thank you very much for your inputs. If you would be interested in any of today's information, or more importantly, if you would be interested in furthering your studies, postgrad studies at the NWU, you're more than welcome to contact us. Don't hesitate and do it. So we thank you for participating and viewing, and we hope and trust that you will stay safe. God bless.